Welcome to the Gain Momentum podcast, focusing on timeless lessons from senior leaders in hospitality, food service, travel, and technology. I'm here with my co-host, Zoe Kombuzi. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Great to have you. And our special guest today is a fellow Gain advisor, author, and founder of Rebyu, Simone Puorto. Simone Puorto.
For having
Come
me.
vai?
Molto bene, molto bene.
Molto bene. Certo. We'll keep it for English, so that way we can appeal to everyone who doesn't know la bella lingua.
Okay.
So,
We
Simone, before getting into our first key question of 4 that we structure this podcast around, I just want to give you a little bit of a plug for your new book that's out, We Are the Glitch. And I'm wondering if you could unpack what that book is about and your reason for writing it right now.
Well, thank you so much. So, yeah, that's the book. We Are the Glitch. Just came out in late April now. It's been a couple of years of work and research. Mainly, the main reason why I wrote the book was to make it a little clearer my vision on artificial intelligence, Web3, and what we can call the metaverse, even though it's not really a word that I do like, and the possible impact in the hospitality industry. It's partially more like a philosophical book. You can put it like that, like the first 100 pages or so. I put it in the introduction, the preface. I say, you're not going to learn anything from the first 100 pages. It's just me, mumbling about what I think will be the future of the technology. And then we move a little more into possible applications now of these different techs and applications in the next few years.
It's funny you mentioned the philosophy of artificial intelligence, because my first thought is that goes all the way back to Ray Kurzweil's first or second book on artificial intelligence, The Spiritual Machine. And,
It's a classic.
I guess you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Oh, yeah, big time. Yeah, big time. Well, actually, it probably goes even farther than that. I quote Gunther Anders. That's a philosopher that actually spoke quite a lot about machines more than, but you can read it as artificial intelligence now. And this was probably 120 years ago or something like that. If you do have enough alcohol in your body, you can probably go back to Socrates and Plato as well when it comes to looking at the machines. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could go all the way back to ancient Jewish texts with the golem. You can go back even farther if you really want.
Believe it or not, they do mention the golem in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one final follow-up is the whole reason for this entire podcast. When we were first ideating it around 2 years ago to the day when we're recording here on October 2024, look back 2 years ago and we were talking and saying every senior leader in hospitality or major industries, they have enough knowledge and experience to write a business book, but they just don't have the time. So Simone, where do you find the time to write?
I make the time. Literally, it goes like that. Look, what I can tell you is this is my 5th book, and I do write books for a reason, and that has nothing to do with, the idea of having my name on a piece of paper. It's more that for me, it is really a way to get all of these different thoughts that I do have and just give them some little structure, right? So it's something that I do anyway. So after a little while, you pile up, words and words and words, and it could be like notes, mental notes, stuff that I record. It could be voice messages to myself. And at some point, you do have enough material that you can write a book. So, and I would say this happened pretty much every, 24 months, probably 24 to 30 months. And so it's really just a question of sitting down and just creating some kind of structure, and the book is pretty much done. So I would say that when I start writing the book is already written in my mind. It's just a question of sitting down now and just putting all the pieces together. And then I always like to do it in a way that is a little less self-centric. So I do have like 4 or 5 people that I trust, and 4 or 5 people that I do not trust. And I asked them to take a look at the first draft, and they gave me some feedback, and that's how it works. So once I have everything in my mind, I would say it takes probably 3, 4 months to write it. And this is just probably 2 or 3 hours a day after work, or, when we travel on a train, on an airplane. And, but the majority of the work is done by then. It's really just a question of sitting down and cleaning it up. And on top of that, you can say a lot of stuff about negative stuff about traditional publishing companies, but they always give you like an amazing editor. So you don't have to deal with, checking typos, or, maybe if you got a source wrong, they will check it out for you. So that, it takes quite a lot of time to do that. So it's usually that. So here's the time.
Awesome. Well, sounds like a very meditative process in that you have it down. But Simone, we're going to dive into our first key question here, which is, when it comes to scaling a business, what is the single piece of advice you would give entrepreneurs from your perspective as a professional in hotel technology?
Well, scalability is really something different for different companies, right? We're looking at, especially in hospitality, and as you know, I do mainly work with Southern Europe, meaning that the majority of the properties I work with are independent properties. And now the paradox is that, of course, is pretty much easier to scale something when you do have bigger properties or branded properties. Like if we're talking about, I don't know, like 400 key property, scalability is not even a question of, you don't even think about scalability. You need to scale at some point, right? While you're thinking about maybe like a small luxury boutique hotel in Paris with 20 suites, scalability has a completely different meaning. And to the point that at some point you need to sit down, and even though I'm a tech enthusiast, as you know, you need to sit down with these people and look, what we want to scale, and will it make sense to scale that? Are we sure that if we introduce some level of automation, for example, of RPA or AI or whatever, will we actually save time? Because sometimes it's not even that black or white. So I would say that scalability means a lot of different things based on the people you talk to, and it's not really a question of reducing the human touch, whatever that means. It's more a question of, do you really need to scale that up or not? Of course, it's easier when we start working with like groups, or when you start working with travel tech, for example. Of course, that is, in that case, you really need to scale. But I would say that to me, if we stick to the hospitality business, I do have a rule, and that's also in my book. And I say, look, if you can scale it up with tech, because that's actually the way we do it, you need to do it in a way that will not affect the guest point of view. The experience of the guest will not be affected. And when I talk about the guest, it's not only the guest that comes with the luggage, it's also your staff, right? So to me, it's always a question of, if you're automating something, if you're trying to scale something up, or if you're trying to go into a more like factory mode or whatever, just make sure that when you do it, the guest and your staff will not feel like their experience is diminished to a certain extent. And I think it's pretty challenging because it's really case by case. And sometimes you're working with very small improvements, meaning that scaling up something could probably make it a little better. But then you need to think if making that better will, going through that process to make that better will actually play out in the end. So I would say it's more a question of, trying to understand if it's worth it or not. And of course, with more tech being available and tech being overall less expensive than it used to be like 20 years ago, now you do have more and more cases where you can scale up even micro businesses. Again, I just came back from a couple of big events in Italy, that. And in Italy, for example, 95% of the properties, they're independent. And of these 95% of the properties, 50% have less than 40 rooms. So sometimes we're talking about like micro companies. There is a risk that you want to scale something and you really believe that you're doing it for the good of the property, but you end up by creating more confusion. And in some cases, scaling it up is not even the main reason why these people want to talk to you. So I think that it's probably, now that I think about it, I never thought about it in these terms, but I think it's probably the most challenging part of my job.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the way that you not only touched upon the guest experience, Simone, but the staff experience as well. And because it's so important to get staff buy-in, obviously, when you're implementing new technologies. And, I was wondering if you had any examples of how that is generally received by staff and what hoteliers are doing to kind of mitigate that.
That's a good one. I always say that in this industry, we do have a L word, right? It's a word we cannot even pronounce, and that is labor, right? And I know it's a similar situation in the US. I know it's a similar situation in Canada, but in Europe, and especially in Southern Europe, this is becoming endemic. It's really a big problem. I do teach at a couple of business schools in Switzerland, and we got 50 to 60% of the students that graduates then move to other industries, right? Either luxury or retail, to the point that hospitality school now to me looks more like a great economy school rather than hospitality school, if you know what I mean, right? You learn these amazing skills that now you can transfer to retail or to luxury or to wealth management or whatever, right? And it's pretty sad, actually. The problem is that we do not have enough people. And it's not even a question of good people. We do not have enough people, not even bad people. It's becoming really a problem. So I would say that the perception before this labor shortage, and some people will tell you that probably we've been understaffed for probably 20 years, right? But it all went down after COVID. But before that, I would say that maybe properties were a little more inclined not to include any piece of automation or AI or RPA, because they were very concerned about losing that human touch. I would say that now it has become a necessity for a lot of those people. They need to do more with less, with guests that are increasingly demanding. So I don't think it does have that science fiction feel to it that it used to have like just 10 years ago now. Of course, again, I think there is a big question, but this is more, again, Adam, is more like a philosophical question, and that is, I think that we need to sit down and think again what we mean when we say the word hospitality, right? Because if you think about it, for years we've been used to, whenever we were talking about hospitality, we were referring to something, and we could agree on that, like a hotel with a front office manager and a reception. Somebody was picking up your luggages, somebody was cleaning up your room, and we were assuming all of these people are humans, right? You need to look at it from a slightly different angle, especially with the explosion of apartments in Europe, for example, Airbnb, where the hospitality experience for the guests is pretty much humanless, right? You go to an apartment, you don't talk to anybody, you just pick the key from PO Box or whatever. And my question is that still hospitality, or hospitality means that there is at least some level of human interaction? I don't really have an answer to that. I'm more inclined to think that the guest needs to have the chance to choose whatever he or she wants. And so it's not really up to us to define hospitality. But I think this is a pretty big paradigm shift that we never faced before. I would say that hotels now are probably a little more inclined to include technology without perceiving it as blasphemy.
Right. So you're talking philosophically about how we define hospitality and whether that has to, as a prerequisite, include a human to human interaction. And the word to contrast hospitality with would be lodging. So, Simone, how would you define the difference between lodging and hospitality?
Again, that is a good one, but I think that destination has plays a big role in that, right? Hospitality is also what happens when you're not really in your bed, when you're not in your room, and I think a lot of that is also the reasons why you're actually traveling, right? I just wrote a preface for a book that a friend published a couple of weeks ago. And I went down and I tried to find the root of the word traveler, right? And whenever you look at, the origin of the words, and usually they're Greek origins or Latin origin, you're always amazed because they never really mean what we're used to think they mean now, right? And so I said, I started with, okay, what is a tourist? And tourism, I never realized it, but it comes from French, tourner, so turn around, And when you talk about tourism, you're referring to somebody that just moves around. It's more a movement implication of the word rather than the experience, right? And the same goes with we got a word in Italian that is called that is viaggiatore, so it means someone that travel, but it's slightly different in the root. And that again doesn't really mean a traveler; it means a luggage. Viaggiatore comes from viaticum. That's Latin for the stuff you bring with you when you do travel, and that seems also interesting because on one side you got one word that we use in our industry, and that is like a movement declination of the word. The other one is not even a word to define what we do. It's a word to define what we bring with us when we travel, right? And at the end of the day, I had to come down with and agree with the people that says that probably the best way to call the people that move from one place to another for whatever reason is the experience. And because when it comes to experience, it is more to experiment something, right? Or to be in a situation that is not only moving, lodging in our case, or bringing a luggage with you, but it's something else. So I would say that when we talk about hospitality, is really about, am I having an experience? And it can also be a bad experience. It doesn't even have to be like a local experience or, great experience. It could be like a horrible experience, but it's still an experience. Like, again, the Latin root of the word experience does have a small part in it that is experience. It's PER. That PER, it's also in an Italian word that is pericolo, meaning danger. So my take is, that PER is you're experimenting something, but while you do experiment something, there is some level of danger, right? You get food poisoned when you travel, and your luggage got stolen, and now you need to go around with, no underwear. It happened to me like a billion times. So I would say that, well, let me put it different. If you come back with a story, I would say that's hospitality.
You've clearly been to Barcelona on your last travels, Simone. With a story or two.
Well, on the note of bad experiences, let's move into our second key question here. So, Simone, what are some of the common pitfalls or failures you have witnessed that business owners should look to avoid when scaling their business?
I would say that the number one concern that I do see every single time we start, and we've done a couple of projects together, Adam. You know that it's more a question of the fear of losing part of what they are. This is usually with tech. It's pretty common. You come up with a new tech stack project, and it doesn't even have to be very advanced, right? We're not even talking about moving to self check-ins or mobile keys. None of that. It's just sometimes something as innocuous as changing a PMS creates this fear in the people going through that process. And I can understand that. And I think there is a psychological reason for that, because in psychology, that is called an availability bias, right? Meaning they remember that they've been through a process that was pretty painful for them, like changing a PMS, for example. And now they assume that every time they will change a PMS, they will go through this process again, or it will be even worse, right? It happens to all of us. There is like traveling with flying on airplanes is very safe. It's probably, I think it's the safest means of traveling in the world. But again, you see one airplane falling, and now you think, okay, flying is dangerous, right? It's availability bias. And every single time you start scaling up a business, every time you start trying to go, with a more scientific approach with businesses, the main concern that I do see in the eyes of the people trying to implement that is always the fear of not being true to what they think they are, not even to what they are, but what they think they are, right? And with technology, I think this is like number one problem we do have, because there are a lot of problems we can solve, and again, implementation, of course, is a big problem for us, or data in silos is another big problem, but all of that can be solved to a certain extent, right? Or it can be mitigated. That fear of losing something of what they are is what I will tell you is usually the main blocker for scalability or tech adoption.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the negativity bias plays out, isn't it, within companies, like you say, and people are so fearful to implement new technologies. Have you got any specific sort of case studies where you've had somebody that's been very hesitant and then there's been a result that they've been pleased with?
Yeah, but look, let me give you an example with very low tech, right? I did have this client. This was a mission. So, from time to time, we have people coming to us and they just want to have like a second opinion or something. So maybe we work with them for a couple of months or 3 months, and that's the end of it, right? These guys came to me, and the only thing they really wanted to evaluate was if they had to implement a payment gateway, right? So basically what they were doing, they were putting manually credit card numbers on a machine, right? This was before PSD2 regulation, so you could still do it at the time, right? And we started writing down and said, okay, how many people do you need to do that? It's probably, okay, you need to pre-authorize or charge, in the case of not refundable reservation, maybe 25 credit cards a day. And okay, probably you will take 2-3 minutes each. And let's say you got a credit card that is not valid. You need to go on booking.com and maybe ask for another one. Let's say on average takes, 5 minutes. And we started doing the math and said, okay, just payment gateway will be way cheaper for you, and you can free up the people, and we can use these people to do something else that has a little more value than just put in numbers. And to me, it was a flawless explanation. I said, okay, let's do it. I was expecting that. I was expecting, okay, sure, it's cheaper. I can get my people to do something else. Let's do it. But the reaction was, I'm afraid we will lose something because we like to do things manually. And that to me was like a revelation, because I thought that, and I started there, I used to be a hotel manager for the first part of my career. But in my mind, it was always, can I automate that? And if I do automate that, will I remove something from the experience? Again, what I told you before. For this client in particular, it was more a question of, this is us. We don't introduce any level of automation in what we do. Everything we do is manual. Even if it's a pain in the ass, we cannot, it takes like a tremendous amount of time. Our staff is super bored to death with that. On top of that, we're breaking a regulation because now people can go around with credit card numbers. They can do whatever they want with that. But if we implement that, we will lose what we are. And that is, we are a company that does everything manually. So you are. That is really like the example. It's every time I think about it, I come back to that specific thing. But I can give you like the small variation of that story.
Yeah, thank you. It's like almost you're asking them to have an identity shift,
Yeah,
not just implement new tech.
big time. For them is, for a lot of those people, implementing technologies like going from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, really, they are afraid they will change so much that guests will not recognize them. And but again, it's really, I think it comes back to some level of identification with thoughts. If I talk to Adam and I said, I don't like your shirt, Adam is smart enough to say, the only problem is my shirt, wherever you are. But if Adam identifies with that shirt, that is going to be a problem, right? And so I think it's, we all know that the hospitality industry is very egocentric. And I think that to a certain extent, it has to be. It's good that you feel part of the ego of something else when you go to a hotel. But they really need to let go. And not without, again, they don't have to let go based on just, trust or whatever. But when you sit down and you show the math and they're still hesitant to do that, that's probably need to think about that.
There's almost a Buddhist argument to be made here for more non-attachment within hotel culture.
That would be the next book.
Yeah.
I don't wanna be too spiritual here, but again, well, if you don't want to go into the Buddhism realm, you can go through something that's a little more, probably resonates a little more with Western culture, and that is Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius used to say, the word is there. It's not for us to try to define the word. It's just there. Just look at it. End of story. And I think that is probably a great piece of advice. Well, be you are. I always say, don't even buy my book. It's just buy Marcus Aurelius. He said everything that we need to know about the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's Meditations is, I would recommend that book to every single person on the planet to read.
Here you are. And it was
the most ironic part.
Which one?
The most ironic part of Meditations is Marcus Aurelius wrote it for himself as a journal, as a way of guiding himself. He never intended it for it to be published. So keeping that in mind when you read it, about saying that a lot of the lessons were things that he had to constantly remind himself of, because we humans are susceptible constantly to things like availability bias or recency bias or negativity bias. We can never cure ourselves from those things. They're constantly going to come back in through the ether of our minds, and you constantly need to remind yourself of it. So it's foundational. It's a foundational book.
I think it's
Simone.
Give as a gift more often in my life. And I was, if I can tell you an interesting story. So I was going to Sweden for a week with my family, and in high tech, I interviewed the CEO of a very well known Scandinavian hotel group, and he told me, just call me, I will give you a discount, and sleep at my hotel. And I did, and it was an amazing experience. He didn't know anything about me, but when I opened the door, on my bed there was a copy of the Meditations. So that to me was like, okay, that's hospitality, right? I don't know if you look it up and maybe saw like a post where I talk about it, but it was there and it was like a magic moment.
Yeah, that is a magic moment. Remembering who you are, specifically you, not just you as a customer. And Simone, we're going to dive into our third question here. And maybe there's a way to tie this together in terms of this whole idea of using technology for personalizations. But Simone, our third question: what do you see as the key opportunities and challenges for hotel technology companies in 2025 and beyond?
Okay. That's an easy answer. Uh, Data. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of clients come to me. Let's put it differently. A lot of clients come to me and they try to solve the last mile problem when it comes to AI mainly. They don't want to be left behind. But I think the question is wrong because they're always trying to ask something like, okay, I know about ChatGPT, right? Now what? Now what? What do I do? And a lot of travel tech companies, I do consult for travel tech companies as well, they have similar problems. And I always say, you know what? A lot of the things we can do now with tech will be way different in just 6 months to a year. Now, the only thing we know for sure is that in order to do something interesting and fun with these technologies, we need to have good data. So I would say that 2025 is there's not like a single technology you need to include in your processes yet, but you need to make sure that your data, first party data, of course, they're crystal clear because we will need those, right? And we will need those in a way that we never needed before. I'm working on a project now with a PMS, and we're working on conversational reporting and predictive reporting, right? And I always say, the first hotel was built, I think it was a Japanese one on top of the Adam. I think it's 741 AC, something like that. And from that property up until the introduction of Microsoft Excel in 1984 or 85 or something like that, we had so many data on paper, very hard to do data crunching with that. We had Excel files and reports and BI, business intelligence, but still the problem is that we need to get this data extraction. We need to sit down and think about this data, right? What I'm working on right now with this client is basically like an LLM model with a chatbot where you can ask questions to the PMS, right? And this could be anything from owner style questions, like stakeholder kind of questions. I just want to know what will be 2025 early revenue. Or it could be very geeky, nerdy questions like how much more or less American clients spent on that particular brand of whiskey last week, right? The information is on the data somewhere, but good luck with extracting this information, and I'm not like, even the best PMS will have problem to give you that information like that. And you can actually do it by just connecting an LLM on top of your data. But the main thing is now I need to trust your data. I need to make sure that your data are there and they're clean, right? So I would say 2025, if you want to do one thing right, be crazily like super crazy about the quality of the data that you do have.
That makes complete sense because, like you say, technology and systems are continuously changing. But if like we say, the caldo, like the brew, the base is not good, then what are you going to do with it? It's really insightful. Great tip.
I put it on a different, and I think I've said it a couple of times, but I always say that every single travel tech company will be a data company in 5 years, or there will be no company. So that's really it. And I'm pretty sure they do have the data. Now, the problem is, what is the quality of this data? And I think it's really, that's the main question. Yeah.
So to get quality data, not just the recording, but the cleaning and structuring, what would you advise on that front in terms of tools that hotels and travel companies can use to properly match and merge or clean ETL, whatever term you want to use, to bring and centralize the data and also test to ensure that it's high quality?
Well, first of all, I would say that you need to reduce as many input error as you can. And that is, you need to limit the human interaction with data, right? So the more you can get data directly from systems without going through a human, the better it will be. We all of us, we've been in that situation where you do have your guest profile in a hotel. You go there like 6 times a year, and you got like 4 different profiles for yourself. And that is just because the receptionist put misspelled the name, or just wrote that the reservation is coming from booking.es rather than booking.com, whatever, right? So I would say that the first piece of advice would be, every time you deal with data, just try to reduce to the minimum human interaction. Just make sure that the data is as pure as possible. Once you do have that, there are several approaches you can use. RPA. I love RPA when it comes to that, to cleaning up data and coming up with single guest profiles. So that's another way, another approach you can use. But again, the more the data will be clean from the source, the less work you will have to do later. So again, just try to reduce any human data input. First thing. Second thing, put a level of automation to come up with single guest profiles. And that is not only on your main system that, for the majority of hotels will be a PMS, but for every single system that record data from guests. So spa system, wellness system, food system. Just make sure that you got one single source of truth, and that is your Bible, right? You need to look at that. So again, I would say that if you do have that, and if you do it right, in 2025, you can have a lot of fun with data, and you can introduce some level of technology and do pretty amazing things. If you do not have a faith in your data because they're all around, no matter the technology will always be like a bunch of hallucination, because now, it's, especially when it comes to generative AI, it's really all about the data you put into the system, right? So just focus on the data.
Yeah, it makes sense. What are some of the most exciting uses of data, clean data, that you've seen?
Look, I'm into this crazy rabbit hole now of data prediction. So I did a test with a client, and they do have this interesting housekeeping/maintenance app. They do have quite a lot of data. We took a client that was, I think it was client number 1 or number 2, something like that, probably 10 or 12 years of data, right? And we trained the model to look at every single maintenance task that was open, every single task that was closed successfully or not, the time needed for the conclusion of each task. And based on that, we try to predict the next problem in a room, right? So with all of this data, we just came up with a couple of questions. And the question that was really shocking to me was, I asked the model, based on what you know now, where do you think we will have the next problem, and in which room, and what kind of problem? And he came up with a pretty interesting answer. So look, based on what I see, room 205, whatever, it seems like you do change quite a lot of light bulbs there, right? So maybe you need to look at the wiring. There's probably something wrong. Based on my past data and what I predict, I think you will have exactly the same problem in 10 days. The system was wrong, but it was wrong for a day. So it said 10 days, and it was actually 9. And that to me was super interesting. And at the end of the day, we sent somebody in the room, like a maintenance guy, and he started looking around, and he found the problem with the wiring of the room, right? But again, that is all only possible because we had this clean first-party data, and now we can come up with this assumption or prediction of what is going to happen. And the other one that I'm really pumped about is conversational reporting. Really, my dream would be that we can live in an Excel-free world in a couple of years. So, yeah.
Yeah, whole idea of reporting and these dashboards that are filled with these pie charts. And pie charts, they can look colorful, but they don't really mean anything. They just show you percentages, right? So,
Yeah.
Simone, we're going to dive into our fourth and final question here to wrap things up. What are the key things innovative leaders in entrepreneurship prioritize and focus on to gain traction for their business?
Look, when it comes to the hospitality industry, I think the main problem is that it is a very operational industry. We all been there, and actually, this is the reason why I left my job as a GM, because if you deal with pillows and mattresses and guests, and if you got people in your house, there will be a problem. At some point, somebody will break up with his or her partner, and somebody will need to go to the police or whatever. You don't really have time, right? So when you work 12, 13 years a day in a hotel and you really need to focus on just fire extinguishing all the time, because you're really just, it's most of it is, it's band-aid strategy, really. You don't really have the time, neither the brain capacity to understand what's going on. And in a moment in time where technology goes way faster than our ability to predict where technology is going, it is pretty much impossible. So, and this is probably a provocative, but not really answer is don't focus on that. Just try to find somebody, and Gain, of course, is a great example of that. Find somebody that does that for a living and that does have the time to sit down and look at technology. And of course, just choose somebody with some proven history of success. But then you need to trust these people, right? You cannot do it by yourself. If you're working in a hotel, you cannot understand what is going on. You can have like an overall understanding of, but it's otherwise it's impossible. So to me, it's more about probably it's more about coming back to what hospitality is all about. And I think this links back to the first question, and that is, at the end of the day, is taking care of guests, right? So if you can focus on that, and if you can remove all kind of distractions, and to a certain extent, understanding which kind of technology you need to implement in your property is a distraction, right? It's something that that probably will pay out in the long term. Now the problem is that there are a lot of people out there probably without the interest of hospitality entrepreneurs as a priority. That's a different story, but I don't have a solution for that. I'm
Not a one.
trying to be very politically correct here.
I mean, one of the beauties of hospitality is it's not a one size fits all. There's room for so many different organizational structures, design, amenities, experiences.
Yeah, but I think you know what, Adam. I think part of the problem is really it's also us. When we teach, especially with the new generation, and these kids will be the new GMs or the new concierge or the new owners. We teach that guest is king, and I think that to a certain extent that is true. But now you need to sit down and define what a king is and what a king wants. And we all think that it needs to have this, pile of people just following the king around. But that's not always the case. You got guests with complete different needs or with complete different expectations that wants a complete different experience. And it's, the simple example that I always use with my clients is, and I live in Rome and I lived in Paris for a long time, right? So big cities, and the problem with big cities is after a while is the human interaction is probably lost in day-to-day activities. And I said, if you live in a big city, try to go to the supermarket where you always go, right? And try to remember the face of the cashier that scanned your barcodes of, your protein bars or whatever. And most people, they cannot do it. They really cannot do it. But if I ask the same question to my mother, that she goes to the supermarket and sometimes she goes there because she wants to have a chat with somebody like another human being, she totally remembers. Probably she remembers also the birthday of this person, right? No one is right. there are just different needs and different expectations. And, so if I go to a supermarket, what I want to do is probably I go to self cashier and just pay, and I want to get out of that as soon as possible. With my mother, is a completely different experience. That's the same with guests, Once we do understand that, every human is different, there is a spectrum of guests' expectations. Probably we'll go back to the real root of what hospitality is all about. So it's really all about diversity.
I think that's a good place to end it, Simone, to getting back to the roots of hospitality and, of course, an eye for the future. And at the end of the day, servicing gets personalization and experiences. Simone, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Gain Momentum podcast. To stay up to date, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Gain Advisors, head to gainadvisors.com.